Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today we are going to be going over the final group in our series of previews for the NBA's first ever in-season tournament. So we have covered all three of the groups in the Eastern Conference, A, B, and C, and now it is time to get to the last group remaining in the West. We talked about groups A and B already. We're going to be talking about Group C today. So, before we get started, we'll do a quick rundown of the format for this video. There's going to be 5 teams that we're talking about in this final group. We're going to divide those 5 teams into 3 different categories, those categories being favorites, contenders, and long shots. Each of those categories reflects where the team stands in terms of, generally speaking, the likelihood that they win their group. So we're going to divide the teams into those sections. Once we've done that, I'm going to talk about one team that I think is the most likely to exceed expectations and finish ahead maybe of that projection, and one team that's most likely to kind of disappoint and maybe fall a little bit short of their projected spot. So, with that in mind, we are going to hop right into it. I will say, though, before we start again, this is the final part of this series, the final group of 6. So, if you want to see any of the previous videos, there is a playlist that has now all 6 of these. There will be both a link in the description to that playlist, and there should also be something clickable somewhere on the screen right now, up in the top right hand corner or somewhere like that. So if you want to see any of the other groups for the in-season tournament, that playlist is available. So with that being said, let's get into it. We are talking about Group C in the Western Conference today, and we'll take a look at the teams in that group. West Group C consists of the Golden State Warriors, the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Sacramento Kings, and the San Antonio Spurs. So, multiple sort of interesting storylines to work with in this group, but we will start at the top of the list here in terms of favorites in West Group C. We do have a couple of teams in that section, and those 2 teams are the 2 California squads here, the Sacramento Kings and the Golden State Warriors. So, let's start with the Kings here. Why not? Because the Kings are in a pretty solid position at this point, and it feels like there's not too many people talking about them, at least at this point in the off season. People seem to be kind of glossing over the fact that the Kings did still finish 3rd in the West last season and have brought back mostly the same lineup coming into this campaign. Mostly the same lineup and pretty much the exact same core group of starters. So I would say that for continuity's sake, the Kings are probably looking pretty good here. And I guess we'll sort of address the main point here. Yes, they lost early in the playoffs to the Warriors. That's part of the reason I think why maybe people aren't as high on the Kings as they otherwise would have been, because they did take that early exit. But to a certain extent, I'm not going to say it was expected that they lose, but it wasn't overly surprising, right? This was a group of young guys with extremely limited playoff experience going up against a team in the Warriors with its current lineup that has more playoff success and experience than any group of guys that you're going to be able to put on the court in terms of active players right now. So that lack of experience going up against a, multi-time championship squad wasn't exactly the matchup that the Kings wanted, but I don't think that this is now a scenario where that was a flash in the pan, where the Kings made that run, lost to the Warriors, and now they're just going to suddenly drop off and fall apart and fall on their faces. They should be in a better position for having made that run in the first place, right? And again, they're bringing back pretty much the entirety of their core sort of intact here. No major changes in the offseason. So I expect them to come back and be motivated, especially in the first couple months of the season when these group play games will happen. So don't be surprised if the Kings get off to a hot start here once, or not once again, because they kind of ramped it up over time last season. But I think that they start closer to the position they were in at the end of the regular season in terms of their play entering this season. But we shall see. In the meantime, taking a look at the other squad here in the favorite section, the Golden State Warriors. I mean, it's the Warriors to a certain extent, right? They're almost kind of the opposite of the Kings, where the Kings made the postseason, then had a lack of experience, and people are kind of discounting them a little bit. The Warriors started the same way, right? They were sort of slow to build momentum. They reached the postseason as a 6th seed, and then obviously they do advance a little ways after beating the Kings, but people still kind of give credit where credit's due for the Warriors, right? They've still got Curry, they still got Thompson, they still got Draymond Green. Yeah, there was some stuff in this offseason with the whole Jordan Poole debacle and sort of sending him away, but they've still got sort of young guys. They've got talent on their bench. They've still got guys like Wiggins and Looney who are presumably not going to suddenly forget how to play basketball and continue to contribute. So I think the Warriors may have reached a little bit trying to lock down the sort of idea of a next generation sort of play, right? They got guys like Looney, they got guys like Wiggins. Then they thought, Jordan Poole could be the next sort of face of our franchise as well. And all of a sudden, we've secured a new big three to replace the sort of Steph, Clay, and Draymond trio as we move. They're going to sort of age out gracefully, and then we've got these young guys sort of coming up behind them. And, for Jordan Poole, at least, they kind of jumped the gun a little bit. But everybody gets one, right? Yeah, the Jordan Poole move was sort of maybe a bad call, and they had to end up trading him away to fix it. I'm not even really sure that that's the right call here, but what they thought was fixing the problem. So I don't think the Warriors are in too big of a deal. Yeah, their guys are older, right? Curry's older, Klay Thompson's older, Draymond Green's older, one more year older than they were before, but their production hasn't massively dropped off, at least not Curry's. So at this point, the Warriors are probably going to be fine and probably going to be a massive threat in this group. But I guess at this point, it's not about production. It's more about health, seeing how Curry and Thompson and Draymond Green sort of hold up over the course of a season. But we shall see if injuries become a concern for them. But with that in mind, we're going to move on to the next section here. We're taking a look at the contenders category in Group C here, and I put a couple of squads in here. Excuse me, a couple of squads in here. Both teams made the play-in this year. Only one of them actually advanced, all the way to the playoffs themselves, but that is the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder. So, we'll start with the Timberwolves because, much like the Warriors, there's going to be some questions about health for them. And while the Warriors had a slightly more optimistic approach here, where it felt like the health of their players was the only thing that might slow them down, for the Timberwolves, the health of their players is, well, obviously something that's going to slow their team down, but it's an issue that they've already had to deal with in the past, right? Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns played relatively few games together last season because injuries kind of kept one or both of them off the floor for a little while. So that was kind of the headline move for them, right? We had this pair of unbelievably talented big men that were supposed to share the floor and be this sort of dominant force for the Timberwolves, and we didn't really get to see it much because, they didn't, their health didn't align at the same time for too many games. So If they're both back and they're both healthy and they can both play the majority of the season together, then they're obviously in a much better place. And we finally get to see that duo in action. Meanwhile, I mean, Anthony Edwards is emerging or continues to emerge as a bona fide star player, right? An absolute just face of the franchise kind of guy, to the point where if you're the Timberwolves, you're starting to maybe shift your pivot a little bit here in terms of who should be the focal point, right? Before, a lot of the thought was that they were going to build around Towns. Now I'm not so sure. Well, no, I am pretty sure, but I'm pretty sure they should build it around Anthony Edwards instead. It doesn't mean they have to get rid of Karl Anthony Towns. It just means he's probably not going to be the focal point of that team moving forward. So the Wolves know what they've got, right? They've got good pieces around the core. They've got Edwards. They've got Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns. So I really do think that the injuries held them back significantly last season. And without some of those injuries, the Timberwolves have a decent shot at just clearing the play-in altogether and avoiding it and making a top 6 seed. I know for a lot of people that might be reaching a little bit, and I will admit maybe, but I look at what they've got on the roster, and I think that they're in a pretty good spot, so long as, again, they stay healthy and nobody sort of rocks the boat, so to speak. So I think they're dangerous. I just think they're maybe not quite as established as teams like the Kings and the Warriors. And again, you have to make sure everybody on that roster stays healthy at the start of the season for them to win out in these group play games. In the meantime, here for the Oklahoma City Thunder, they're kind of in a similar situation to the Timberwolves, right? They have questions about health, but other than that, we see the potential on their lineup, right? Chet Holmgren, is back after missing his entire rookie season. SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, is a star player, right? A sort of Anthony Edwards-esque guy who just takes over games and scores an insane amount of points. But we need to see this team in action first before we can definitively draw conclusions about where they're at right now, right? Holmgren did look good in some summer league appearances, but that's not full-on NBA level competition. And I want to see how that offense works, because SGA got a lot of the offensive opportunities. It was warranted last season, but with Holmgren here, how much does that change? How much does the offense flow through the paint into the post for Holmgren? And does that take away some of SGA's touches? Does it affect his scoring? Does it affect his efficiency? So there's a lot of questions here. And then outside of just Holmgren and Alexander, what happens with the rest of this lineup? What happens with the supporting cast of the Oklahoma City Thunder? Because they need someone to step up. They need a third sort of guy here, right? A third musketeer, so to speak, for the Thunder. I don't know if it's going to be someone like Lou Dort, Josh Giddey, Jalen Williams even, who's coming off of a solid rookie season. And I just remembered that there's two guys both named Jalen Williams, but their names are spelled differently. But the one who had the better season, and if you don't know which one, it doesn't really matter. If you do know which one, good for you. But one of those guys needs to step up and be that sort of clear third option here, because they will need some degree of consistency, right? Even if that third player isn't approaching the level of production as SGA or Holmgren, they at least need someone who they can reliably put the ball in their hands and expect that person to hold the line, if nothing else, right? Because Holmgren and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander cannot play 48 minutes per night. They are going to be on the bench at certain points in the game, and you need a second unit that has some sort of leadership that you can count on. So that's why the Thunder are here and maybe not, well, obviously sort of not in the favorite section. There's so much potential in this lineup, we just haven't seen it actualized yet. So the hope is that at the start of the season, we see them just sort of come flying out the gates with a game plan in place that works really right away, but we can't be sure of that. But for now, they remain in the contenders section, and that moves us into our final category here, the long shots of West Group C. I say long shots plural, but there's only one team in this section, and that is the San Antonio Spurs. And this one's pretty straightforward. The Spurs got what they wanted, right? I don't want to say lost on purpose, because obviously, um, there's a lot of stuff attached to that kind of accusation, but they successfully didn't win as many games as they could have. Let's put it that way. And they ended up with Victor Wembanyama, right? That was the point. You wanted the number one pick. You wanted Wembanyama on your team, and the Spurs managed to do it. So they add one of the most exciting prospects we've seen in a while. And with that addition, the Spurs should begin to improve. They should start becoming a better team. But they will not be a better team in the first 3 months or so of the season to actually make any waves in this group, right? And if you think that, it might be time to sort of lower those expectations a little bit. Wembanyama looks talented. He's got a lot of potential. But I don't remember. I think maybe it was even in the Spurs offseason, the early offseason preview video we did for San Antonio. I went over sort of number one overall picks and the records of the team that they were drafted to in their first season. The best season in the past, I want to say it was like 15 years that we went back, was last season. Paolo Banchero helping the Magic win 34 games. That was the best rookie campaign from a number one pick in terms of their team's performance, right? So let's say that Wembanyama matches that performance. Let's say that Wembanyama beats that performance, right? Well, you're still looking at the Spurs being a team somewhere in the 35 to 40 win range, reasonably speaking. And you would need to get a decent number of wins within the first sort of 2 months. So we're not even talking about a by the end of the season scenario here. We're talking the Spurs come out and Wembanyama is so good that he can carry this team in the first 2 months of a campaign. I would love to see that. That would be an amazing story to talk about, but I think it's exceptionally unlikely to happen. Especially when you consider as well the rest of the lineup around Wembanyama still has some stuff to figure out here, right? They've got guys like I think Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, who are talented, young, have potential, but they're going to have to adjust to a system here for the Spurs that will now no longer revolve around them, right? They were kind of the star prospects with a lot of the offense flowing through them. And now that's just not going to be the case. If Wembanyama's there, if the Spurs were willing to effectively tank a season or two to get this guy, he is the number one option every single time. And the rest of the lineup is going to have to adjust to that. And I think that's definitely something that they can adjust to, especially for maybe some of these younger players that the Spurs have who might not be fully set in their ways just yet. Let's sort of put it that way, right? They're not quite experienced enough to have bad habits that they would have to break, but it still has to be an adjustment period. And even if they do adjust, is this team honestly good enough, right? Is Wembanyama good enough? Is Wembanyama plus, plus Vassell plus Johnson enough to get past teams like the Warriors, like the Kings, like the Timberwolves and the Thunder in group play, at least in an 8-game sample size? Can the Spurs in the first 2 months of the season win more of those games than they lose? I genuinely do not believe so. So that's the reason why the Spurs are here. They will get better just because there's really nowhere to go but up for them at this stage, but it's not going to happen early enough to matter for the in-season tournament. So that is all 5 teams in their respective categories here. So we will recap what we've got so far. We have the Sacramento Kings and the Golden State Warriors in the favorites section up at the top. In the middle here, it's the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Oklahoma City Thunder in the contenders category. And rounding out our quintet of teams, it's the San Antonio Spurs in the long shots section. So those 5 teams sorted into their respective categories. We will now take a look at one team that I think could overperform those expectations and one team that might be likely to underperform. So, we'll start with the positives, right? We'll start with the most likely team to overperform here, and I am going to go with the Oklahoma City Thunder on this one because I honestly I'm very sort of high on what the Thunder have right now. I think that they've got a lot going for them. This team already managed to make it to the play-in with just what they had last season. Obviously, they didn't make it all the way through, but they fought. In a scenario where at the start of the season people were wondering if the Thunder were going to be a big player in the tanking scenario, right? If they were going to try and go for a guy like Wembanyama themselves. Instead, they realize around halfway through the season that they're not that far behind some of those play-in teams, and they fight their way to at least postseason play, right? Even if they didn't make the playoffs. Now you add Chet Holmgren to that situation, healthy and presumably ready to go, and I think the Thunder should be able to improve upon that performance, right? You add Holmgren, some of your young talent managed to get another year of development as well, so I think that this team can be significantly better, and because of sort of the trajectory that their season took in the last campaign, I think that there's a lot to be said for them being better right away, right? Because this team didn't sort of limp to the finish line. They were on an upswing. They went from being in the bottom, being in that sort of 12th or 13th place position, to fighting their way upwards in the standings to the play-in, and getting that postseason experience for a roster this young, I think definitely has a little bit more of an added effect. So the Thunder ended their season um, going up instead of down, and now you add, more talent to that. I think that could be sort of motivation for the Thunder to come out at the start of this campaign when these group play games start and have a level of confidence that was slowly sort of building up over the second half of the previous season and now might just be here for that team in general. So we shall see, because it does depend on what happens sort of with Holmgren here. Is he 100% ready to go? Is he ready to match up against NBA level competition? Because if he is, I think the Thunder are really ready to show us something early. But we'll keep an eye on that. In terms of the team most likely to underperform expectations, though, I do have to put the Minnesota Timberwolves here, which feels a little bit rough, but I mentioned earlier that it felt like sort of health was something that was holding them back, right? If Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns are both fully healthy, this team should be better. If McDaniels doesn't break his hand punching a wall, then they have him for the postseason. If Anthony Edwards continues to be an absolute monster, then he might just sort of put his name in the hat for MVP consideration, depending on how well he plays. But that's all dependent on this all working out. All of these guys have to be healthy, and I think perhaps just as importantly, the chemistry needs to be developed here, right? That is sort of an issue for the Timberwolves. They didn't have their full rotations playing all the time. Obviously, they're working out together, they're practicing together, so there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes that we don't get to see. But in terms of how well this team plays in the first month or two of the season, when the group play games will be played, having all of your guys not just be healthy, but be on the same page with each other is going to matter a little bit more. Over the course of a full season, some of those concerns go away because the players get more comfortable sort of playing together. But you take guys who, like I said, weren't always in the same rotations due to injury, and you throw them all together, there might be an adjustment period here for the Timberwolves, and if that adjustment period takes them too long to sort of get over and fix, then it could have an impact on some of these group stage games that are going to be played in, November and December. So, it's a little bit nitpicky, but honestly kind of had to find something. I truly believe that this year's Timberwolves team will be better than last year's. I do think that they figure it out and they have something a little bit more consistent, but there are some questions about whether that improvement and that consistency will come early enough in the season to affect the context of the in-season tournament. But that's a slightly pessimistic approach here for the Timberwolves, but it is a concern that you can't necessarily just ignore. But That is it here for Group C in the Western Conference. I think this is going to be another group that I think is highly competitive. We did differentiate between tiers of squads here, right? The Kings and Warriors are in the favorite section, whereas the Timberwolves and the Thunder are in the contenders. But realistically speaking, I could see just about any team here other than the Spurs winning this group. Um, is it more likely that someone like a team like the Warriors ends up winning? Yes, absolutely. That's why they're in the favorite section. But I would not be surprised if the Timberwolves or the Thunder or the Kings come out early and just start sort of racking up wins in these group play games. But either way, the games should be good. As I said, any of those four teams could win it. Sorry, San Antonio, but I don't quite believe that they're going to be good enough in the first 2 months of the season. If they are, though, if they somehow come out on fire and the Spurs take this group, that would be simply amazing to see. And honestly, I do kind of want it to happen just so that we'd have something extraordinary to talk about. But again, does not seem very likely. But those are my thoughts on the final group here for the in-season tournament. So we'll see what happens when those games get underway in, I think it's November. I want to say November 3rd in terms of the first day that groups stage games are going to happen. I don't know 100% though, but that date stuck in my mind for some reason. But please feel free to let me know what you think here. Do you think that this group is sort of the Warriors to win or lose? Do you believe sort of the same way I do that teams like the Kings, the Wolves, and the Thunder are going to sort of be more competitive in this scenario? And what do you think the reasonable, quote unquote, reasonable expectation should be for the Spurs, right? Should we be looking at them as higher up on this list, or, is it a little bit too early to maybe make that call? But feel free to let me know what you think. This is the last of the groups. So once again, if you want to see any of the previous videos in the series, the playlist is going to be linked in the description of this video, somewhere down there-ish. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.